Good afternoon, Anne.
Good afternoon.
We're very happy we're able to talk with you because in this Festival 13 we're very busy running everywhere, and so we were really able to have a little time to make this interview for Human Art TV.
Thank you so much.
This project of a YouTube channel is to talk about art and how art has a possibility to transform ourselves as individual and society. Mm-hmm. And so we were really looking up forward to meet you. And
Thank
so
you.
I have 3 questions for you.
Okay.
Yes. So my first question is if you could talk to us about your meeting with Trungpa Rinpoche and the creation of Naropa University, and specifically the Dharma Art, which goes very much along with the topic of this media. And then I tell you the other questions after.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I first met Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche in 1970, and I was in New York City, living in New York City, where I come from, and working at the Poetry Project at St. Mark's Church in the Bowery, which continues. It's now over 50 years, a very vibrant community around poetry and hybrid work and political work. And I was invited by Jerry Rubin of the Yippies and his wife to go to Canada. Mm-hmm. And so I was on a trip with a friend, stopping along the way. We were driving, and we were going to visit friends also in Canada and wait for a boat that would take us to Cuba. Ah. But there had been problems with the sugarcane. The sugarcane economy was helping support some of these outreach ventures to politically attuned and sympathetic to the Cuban Revolution. So artists mainly, more experimental, radical with a history. So, and I had met a friend in New York, Wynne Chamberlain, a filmmaker and visual artist, who told me about another friend who British actor Richard Artur Kungadawa, who was a very early student of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and accompanied him to the sadhana Mahamudra, the occasion for that sadhana, traveled with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And that this Lama had come to the US, etc. And there was a little Sangha in Vermont. Mm-hmm. And so the idea was to stop on the way to Canada. And so we stopped. This was the summer of 1970. And we had one of the only functioning, my friend had a car, and we arrived. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche was not there. He was arriving by airplane from a conference in California. He had been invited to speak, I believe, at the University of California through the philosophy department, philosophy and religion. But he had also been curious about Disneyland and this sort of thing. So we had to go to the airport, small airport, and met the plane. He got off somewhat inebriated and talking about Disneyland and the hologram of Casper the Friendly Ghost, not particularly familiar to maybe audiences abroad, but was a cartoon figure of the time. Yeah. And that somehow Casper was, as I understood it, I didn't know a lot about him or some of these references. But Casper, holograms were like, Sambhogakaya realm, the realm of light. Yes. These, magical images. And he was amusing, entertaining, and then that day or the next night began a 2-week seminar or gathering on exploring the songs and the history of Milarepa. Oh. But things were not particularly organized. Yes. He was welcoming students it was basically come as you are. And so people had not been trained particularly in even lotus posture or various meditative traditions. People were coming with their own versions, eyes closed, eyes open, moving, chanting, visualizing a flame, all kinds of projections of what this practice could be. And he was not at that point giving a official, that was to come later, where things got a little more traditional and proper teaching, and the texts and the philosophical dimensions, the understanding of the three yanas, etc. So it was basically Hinayana prep, or come as you are, just welcome who was interested, and there were a few course students.
So
by
that
then.
was your first meeting?
That was my first meeting with him. And then and we had one private meeting where he was, was mysterious. I did say something about I had been, living in New York. I'd gone to college actually in Vermont, but I was living in New York, working very hard on the Lower East Side with the poetry project. There were many
You were 19 years
political.
old?
I was 20, I think, by then. 20, 21 by that summer. And so I said something, people are going back to the land. It's so beautiful here in Vermont at the center. And he said, no, New York is a holy city. You have to go back. Okay. And then I said something about being on my way to maybe to Canada, maybe to Cuba. It didn't work out to go to Cuba ultimately. So, and I thought maybe he had jinxed it. Anyway, so we stayed, slept in the barn. Jack Nyland was there, who was starting to work with Dharma Art, and some of the early people I've continued to work with, who had gone to Brandeis University, Chuck Leaf, and
Jack Nyland designed our logo.
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah, very gifted artist. And then, so then what happened? So, left. He'd given us the Dharmas of Gampopa, this chant and I remember riding in the car to Canada, chanting the Dharmas of Gampopa and so on. So, and then from there visited the playwright Sam Shepard, who was living in Cape Breton, and
so how did it come up that you created Naropa?
So then,
and what is it about the Dharma art in this?
Back in New York, then we saw him. I told Allen Ginsberg about him. Allen had this interesting meeting in a taxi in front of the Museum of Modern Art, a famous story of his old father, and
they wanted the same
taxi cab.
And then
now
they took it together. No, I think.
Now they could call Uber. Things have changed. So so there was a lot of tendril, auspicious coincidence among these various people who were later to be magnetized. And then so I invited Trungpa to talk at the poetry project at St. Mark's. He showed up late. He said, I eat, I piss, I shit, why do you come to me, or something. And my mother was there, who was not particularly conservative, but she was, what is this about? But it was provocative, and that he was also a poet was very interesting to me.
Yes.
And so involved with the arts and interested. It was as if, I put it this way at one point, someone were to land from outer space, come from Mars and say to the first person they met, take me to your poets.
Yes.
So there was a sense of a very, high lama within this tradition that people didn't necessarily know much about, but that he was interested in the poets. So that was curious. Nobody comes to America and is saying, take me to your poets.
Yes, because actually what I understand from the Tibetan lineage and lots of lineages in the Buddhism is that it's actually really about poetry and about communication by singing and poetry. Like Milarepa is Togawa, which means the happiness of the sound. He has a nice sound when he talks. And this is maybe something we forget a lot when Buddhism comes to here.
Right.
That actually the Tibetan Buddhism, and I think also the Japanese, is a lot about training with art.
Yes, there's a sense also of the way that art helps people wake up to the world, helps wake you up to the world, and that perhaps, I mean, this has been said by maybe Heraclitus and others, that poetry is the first religion. So that's always helpful, you know, the first religion.
The
and
speech.
That poetry came from birds.
Ah, okay.
Came from birds. You
like
have birds,
gypsies.
birds to humans to speech to, you know, song coming through.
Comes from the birds.
So it's not science, hard science, but it's a very nice sort of sense of lineage, I think. In many traditions, you have the, you know, in Iran, the what's it called, the Congress of the Birds.
Yes, yes.
You know, that animal wisdom, animal inspiration, intelligence is you know, we were more connected long time ago, very connected to the earth, to animals, to a certain kind of communication and understanding. So that it was very comfortable that art seemed at the root for him of some of his ideas. And then, so I saw him in New York a few times. Alan and I went to his center. The center was very fluid at that time. There was no money to, you know, buy buildings. That things started to become more, you know, never institutional, but more settled in Colorado. I think that's where things really were able to take root. And I mean, Boulder was also a kind of auspicious situation where he was invited to the University of Colorado through, again, philosophy, some people interested, and then saw this, you know, town high in the mountains, closer to the, you know, the snow mountains and the negative ions, and this, maybe friends of mine would say, oh, it's like Tibet here. So that sense of a kind of space, it was uncharted ground in a way. I mean, there had been Native American presence, the Arapaho and Ute Indians to some extent, Native people, but some Dralas, I think he felt, and doing some divination on particular mountains and
like Dralas, like
energy,
like kami, or like the energies.
Yes, the energies of the atmosphere, of the elements, of the wind, of the sky, of the sun, so on, and much closer to, you know, a place where he had come from, you could say, in terms of choices you would have in the US of A, where you would try to have some kind of foundation. So by the summer of 1974, an invitation came to participate in a summer program that would involve other arts and other spiritual teachers from other traditions. And the poets involved who were invited were myself, Allen Ginsberg, and Diane de Prima. And then I believe John Cage was coming through town. We had invited him, and other people were passing through. The poet Jackson McClough and others were magnetized by this herd of this teacher coming who was progressive, outrageous, very interested in American culture and mores, and had, you know, was very open also to some kind of collaboration with American mind.
Yes.
And I had gone to India in, let's see, 73, I guess, the first seminary. I'm trying to remember. Instead of going to the first seminary with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, I went with the poet John Giorno, and I was on an airplane with students of Nim Karoli Baba, who was a Hindu teacher who had just passed away, and so I knew some of the people going to pay homage for Baba. And we went to Gum, we went to Darjeeling, we went to Kalimpong, and met incredible lamas. I met Chadrol Dorje Rinpoche, who was my first teacher, my Sawat Lama.
Oh, I didn't know.
So I took just a refuge.
This is the master of Sultrima Leone, no? Or of the lady who's a nun?
Well, it's Yeshe Tsogyal incarnation.
Okay.
His daughter is one of his lineage holders. He was not a tulku.
Okay.
He was a kind of yogi. And he passed away about 3-4 years ago now. He was about 101 or 2.
Uh-huh.
I wasn't able to go the time, but I went a year later, and they were still doing
in South America?
Ceremony. No. He was in Parping, right outside Nepal. And he was the teacher of the Queen of Bhutan. So he spent time in Bhutan. He spent time in these, remoter areas. He never traveled to the West.
Okay.
And then I met Dujum Rinpoche, who was very powerful, and Kalu, with the beautiful neck like a bird, extremely sort of ethereal. And we were paying off. That was the whole point of this trip together. It was a kind of peregrination of pilgrimage. You could say pilgrimage meeting, and somewhat new to me. Although I had met when I was 18, I met the great Mongolian Lama, Geshe Wangyal. Mm-hmm. He was amazing. Geshe Wangyal came to America, actually one of the first Buddhist teachers in that tradition, and settled outside New York and New Jersey. It was had young monks, and was doing translation work and working with some students from Harvard, including Robert Thurman. So I met Robert Thurman when I was quite young.
The father of Uma Thurman. So at this time it was like easy to have a relationship between artists, universities, and masters of spiritual path that are really trained since they are young. This was like, it seems from what you say that
it's magic.
At this time it was really happening easily.
It was easy or fortuitous. I mean, you felt it was
like you were in the midst of it at 20 years old.
But you felt it was kind of auspicious. It wasn't just ordinary, and and you didn't, and it was not casual in that you felt. I was very nervous meeting Geshe Wangyal. I didn't know how to present, and there were guys around me, young, students and scholars studying the language, studying Tibetan, as Thurman was. And they would say, you always, keep your legs together and don't wear makeup. And I wasn't really even wearing makeup.
And but your shoulders has to be covered.
Just to have a certain decorum with the teacher. But it felt powerful. It wasn't casual. You didn't think, I can take it or leave it. It was never, I could never walk away or, one more thing.
Yeah, there was a sense of sacredness.
Yeah,
that's what you
exactly.
mean.
And I had taken LSD in, when now? 65, I guess. 64, 65. And I had had some visions that were a little bit like some of the opening Nundro visions where you visualize everybody you know. And you.
I had things like that too.
And you're all, what? You're looking at the sky, what next? What do we do? We're here. We need help. We need succor, which is sort of the Chenrezig. The origin of the name of the Bodhisattva Chenrezig is to, that he's listening to the sounds of the people who are crying for help, basically the sounds of sentient beings who are suffering and need help. So there was, all that going on. I was also politically involved, and of course with Alan, shared a lot of the same worlds by then and interest, and Vietnam War was happening. I mean, it was just like now, just constant roiling of not only the roiling of the society around gender and race problem, which in my country has never been resolved or solved, which is all over, and then it's fed by this obsession with terrorists and people of color coming from the Middle East. I mean, just extreme situations where people are very actively pursuing this kind of skiyamaki, this shadow war, and it's the war in God realm. You have to create an enemy. Even if you had no enemy, you would have to create an enemy to get your juice going. Yeah. So it's very, very dangerous and toxic time, and we're creating these horrible weapons and weapons of serious mass destruction with nuclear, and Trump is bringing that back. So back then also we were fighting in Boulder, the Rocky Flats plutonium plant. So I just want to say there was an artistic thing going on, and I was very committed as a poet. I was already on that path. Yeah, I don't know what else to do. I can't do anything else very well.
Do you think that these meetings at this time you're talking about opened a gate for you, like you were, I don't know, I'm just imagining that you were ready for something, but it opened a gate to give you like full certainty of your art, your poetry, how this can make you be, how would I say, in a natural service towards the world, something like that?
Yeah,
this is how I feel you. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so, and I think there's also a kind of confidence, giving a sort of confidence that this is a path, that poetry is a vow, is a spiritual vow.
Like a samaya.
That these samaya, and that also working in the world is a vow. And there were always these issues around people saying, oh, if you become Buddhist, you can't be political. You know, these divisions within just people, humans, who are constantly interpreting and projecting and have their own view and make it work for them. So I had to kind of find my way and trust the path, and to be, you know, in this beautiful Colorado, you know, and Tibet, of course, going through its incredible samsara.
And the sacred city of New York.
And the sacred city of New York. And it's constantly about, you know, transmutation and flip. You know, you have to live with the, you know, the pratitya samutpada, the interconnectedness of us all, but also tamagi shepa, which is the, you know, the contradiction. It's this and it's this,
paradox.
And it flip and flip. And in poetics, you have the famous John Keats line around negative capability, and which is, you know, you cannot, this irritable reach after fact and reason. There's no reason for this. I mean, I think Buddhism has the best analysis of passion, ignorance, aggression, and the 12 nidana chain, and so on, and so on, and all the kleshas and the abhidharma and the different stages of this and that. But if you don't know, if you don't have these descriptions, it can be very confusing, and you have to figure that out. So this negative capability, which is, and Keats talks in his letter to his brother, this famous document, about how this is the quality Shakespeare had. In Shakespeare's work, in Shakespeare's art, you have these characters that are fully who they are. And it's not that they're good or bad, but it's complicated, and that they coexist. And so this sense of coexistence and also how can flip.
They create a mandala.
Together. Exactly. So that was helpful.
So like, if you talk about this, it's true that for example, if we train in dance, for example, we always have to work very strongly with the dual side of space and time, or the two legs, or being down or up, or on the horizontal or the vertical. So actually get used to even the whirling. If you whirl on your left, actually you need to be whirling in the same time on your right. So there is something like a relationship with non-duality that comes from understanding that actually instead of rejecting duality, you actually use the duality as a path. Is that?
Yeah,
that
definitely.
Seems to you
Definitely.
like co-emergency.
Right.
Yes.
And then also there's a state beyond that, beyond duality.
The third one.
The third one.
Yes, like the center.
Yeah. But it, you know,
in poetry you have the same.
I think, well, you can create resonances. There's nothing absolute, I think, in poetry. And you can have people who are not great bodhisattvas, who are great poets. Ezra Pound, you know, we have some problematic people. Gertrude Stein in her collaboration with Vichy, and you have Stein and his, you know, Mussolini obsession, and, you know, difficult artistic, I mean, the artistic personality, if you can even call it such, is, you know, it's complicated.
Oh, the work with symbolism and with the strength of art, how art is strong to influence us. This is really the topic. And how do you, my second question was, how do you feel about this many years of you working all over the world with poetry and with your dedication, your commitment? It's very important for us to hear, like, I would say, like essential resume of how you feel about this huge, how we say in English,
well, it's like karma yoga.
Yeah, karma yoga.
Work in the world. Work in the world.
It's like you have been all your life creating something that is always disappearing, but actually it is a whole breadth of work. And so I would really like that we take the opportunity to hear you saying this, and that you can be heard by other people and young people.
Well, I invoke the term infra-structure poetics. So it's important to help create, architectures or models that are not necessarily permanent, as you say.
Yes.
There's a useful term from the writer Hakim Bey, who published a book called TAZ, T-A-Z, Temporary Autonomous Zone.
Yes.
And so it's not that you're creating things to become
Yes,
institutions.
it's exactly what
they
I'm
don't
doing.
have to
Yes.
be these huge buildings and
That's
be
what
there
we do.
forever and become Harvard University or,
Yeah.
Oxford.
Up and they
come,
dissolve.
they might dissolve, but
And
they
you
also have gestures in the world, and so they can be picked up on, and things can come out of those ideas or relations, or you can pass on the spirit and models, in a way, models that are based on generosity or lack of competition. That was something we thought of when we were starting Naropa, that we would not get into that wheel of competing, and this person has more talent than you do, this is higher, this constantly rating things, and but also very concerned about intelligence, that you are working hard, that you are dedicated, that you're doing your work. It's not so casual, oh, I'm a poet, and that's how I go through with my identity. So looking into identity, but I was very aware when I went out to Berkeley as very young, saw this Berkeley Poetry Conference. Ginsberg was there, Charles Olson, Robert Duncan, very key people in the alternative worlds of the so-called New American poetry. But there were very few women.
Yes.
And very few people of color. I mean, you had Amity Baraka, who's amazing and a revolutionary thinker and great poet. And I remember taking a vow at Berkeley. I want to work with this kind of community. I'm very interested in these intergenerational and communities of elders, and then younger people coming, and everything in between. It's not that you have to be a complete arrived poet to be part of this. So that interested me. Publishing small editions, small printed things, handmade books, community-oriented events, little readings springing out of coffee houses or bars, and we've had many of that kind of thing in New York. So St. Mark's Poetry Project became a place where the Black Panthers could have a breakfast kitchen. There was a group called the Motherfuckers to do their whatever they were doing, dinner
with
maybe.
Black Panthers.
But in the same world, and then you had the Trotskyites,
Oh my God.
and their meetings. You had the Puerto Rican Liberation Committee, and I was on that. And then you had the church, and I served on the vestry just to be a liaison, to be a kind of communicative person for the different things going. It was not always all these things going on, but at one point in the late 60s, 70s, and Vietnam War stuff, there was a poets mobile that was traveling around the city with poets declaiming poems from the back of this flatbed truck against the war in Vietnam. We were doing benefits later for Biafra, for certain important causes, collecting food, etc. So it became a hub of radical activity, but also community activity, housed by a church which was Dutch Reformed in its early years, second oldest church in New York City. It was where the governor, Petrus Stuyvesant, it was his parish. There were slave pews when we took over the church, still upstairs, pews that had slaves. Slaves would come to church and have to be upstairs in the pews.
Yes.
Yeah. Still that kind of exposed, everything kind of exposed. And recently, with the group Dance Space that has been at the church also for a number of years, does extraordinary work in dance. Some of the African American and other investigators have been using the area where the slave pews were, where they used to be, and sort of examining some of that history. So it's very alive.
So coming
still
back
as a space.
To your feeling, like if it would be an essential thing, like imagine we would take just like 2 minutes of this movie and that some young people could listen to. Yes.
Well, I'm saying remember what you love. Remember what you love. What was it? What was your first experience of art? What was your first? Was it poetry, insight? What you maybe read, what you heard, what you saw? Maybe you wrote something. Maybe you thought, oh, maybe I'm an artist, or whether you had a connection that direct or not. But what was it about an experience with the arts that maybe woke you up, or made you think twice, or made you want to be more connected, find out more of that? I need more of that. I need more poetry in my life. And that was my experience. I was very lucky. My mother had lived in Greece. She went to Greece in 1929. She was married to the son of a very well-known Greek poet, Angelos Sikelianos. My half-brother was born there. She had dropped out of school herself, had gone to Greece age 19. And so she was a great example of, a American woman she had a invalid mother, single parent, and very adventuresome. And so coming back before the war, and she had lived with her mother-in-law was a dramaturg. She created these festivals. She was American, actually. The mother-in-law who married Sikelianos, the poet, created these festivals in Delphi. There's a lot of history around that period too. And she was involved with the Women of the Left Bank. She was lesbian, bisexual. She was actually bisexual. She had an affair with Natalie Barney, and she knew the Isadora Duncan. So there's this very interesting.
Yes. Oh, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
So my mother.
I like these interconnections. It's very interesting.
So there was a lot of sympathy, and in my own home and life and my mother's experience, she constantly talked about Greece, and she learned to weave, she wrote, she studied Greek, she translated some of her father-in-law's poetry. I published a little book of my mother's translations. She was also translating César Moro, a poet, a South American poet who wrote in French, partially in French, and knew André Breton. And so I was very lucky to have these kinds of references. And then my father came from working class as well, South Jersey. His people were glass blowers, but he was also artistic. He wanted to be a writer. He read novels, but he was a musician. He dropped out of college. But when he went, he had to go to serve in World War II. He took off before I was born. My mother was pregnant, but he went off to Germany. And he came back. I was already maybe 9 months old, and he came back and he went to school. He finally went to school to NYU, New York University, and Columbia, got his graduate degrees, became a teacher. So second lives. My parents had several lives. My father had several lives. And so I was interested in this community that my mother had been part of. It was an arts community in Greece. They knew Orozco, the painter, and anyway, very interesting. And my parents met at an Isamu Noguchi party, the Japanese-American sculptor. So I had this, lineage I had to,
Yes, okay.
And my mother, she wanted me to be an artist. If I see you, it was when I was getting out of college, if I see you pushing a baby carriage, I'm going to kill you. She was essentially saying.
Did you have babies?
I have a son, who's here, Ambrose.
Well.
But later.
Well done.
Later. No, but she was invested but in a kind of passionate way. It wasn't about fame or money or career. It was just this is what you have to be. This is the only way to live.
I have something like that with my mother. My mother's same age as you, I think.
Maybe.
And my mother kind of raised me that I should become an artist, something like that. Yeah. I didn't really do exactly what she wanted, but I ended up doing that.
Yeah, clearly.
Lots of things. But maybe, I don't know, maybe that time between the two wars really gave to people in the same time this really difficult thing because 2 world wars is incredible.
Incredible. And what women had to go through. My mother worked in factories during the war. I mean, they could be part of the war effort, but the men going off. I mean, this whole drama.
This actually was
trauma.
How a woman. You're cold. You get it.
No. I'm sorry.
And then nowadays, I think it's like it's like we kind of forget in all of that, but it's actually really like seeing fruits of all of these things, no, happening.
Oh yeah. No, I'm very blessed. I'm happy I was alive at this time. I can't imagine it any differently in a way. And I'm also so proud of my generation, even though we're dying and we didn't solve it. We didn't fix the world.
Is it fixable?
Is it fixable? You have to ask. How we enjoyed, we bounced with, but still this incredible suffering, also hand in hand, is just, if you start to think about it, you can go crazy.
Of course, completely.
And so finding rituals,
he does when he
in your poetry he works and works to drain the world. He looks back and it's all filled up again. It's like the Zen adage, you have to sweep. You sweep
and it starts again.
And then it starts again. You have to sweep. You just have to keep doing it.
And you said, so you have to ritual. You said you have to make a ritual. That's what you were saying.
Yeah, just some kind of. Not that I'm very good at that, but I think just to keep your consciousness, to keep your mind, to not let your mind get lost in the screen, get lost in obsessions about, your anger. And we do that all the time. I'm very angry at these politicians, and they're not even politicians. I don't know what they are.
No, nobody does.
It's like some demons, it's some genetic thing to be a Republican, I think. You're born with some kind of weird Republican genes. I don't know, I'm trying to understand. And it's just hungry ghost realm, more and more and more. Yeah. And it's the white Confederacy. In my country, it's these old white guys who are still running. They're just trying to hold on till their last breath. Yeah. Mitch McConnell. Oh, I just want to strangle them. So we're up against this. I'm even older than some of them. These just ridiculous, abominable minds. Just hungry for what? Power, money, more. Just feeding this. So Boschian too. So anyway, back to Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. Such a great teacher. So close to idiomatic, ways of speaking and writing. Very good students, I think. The core of his early students who really followed, and very diverse. Paths that people had, and so that the building of this almost archive of his teaching, which has been good under Judy Leaf and others and the translation projects, but it's always been controversial, fraught with up and down.
I have spent some time in Naropa University seeing all the videos of Dharma art. So at that time, people were not looking much into that. At that moment was 2004.
Yeah. Okay.
And the person who was taking care of the archivas, he told me, I shouldn't do this, but I'm giving to you all the archivas because nobody's looking at them.
Nobody's taking care.
So I took them.
Good.
And but not the movies, but nowadays they say we can buy the movies now. But
maybe
at that time we couldn't buy it. But I have some books.
Great.
And actually I was spending like 8 hours a day seeing the conferences, and it's well, you guys were so lucky.
Yeah.
It was so wonderful. So maybe
and you felt it was all this work in progress. I mean, it had to start. Something started, and maybe it was. I like to invoke the rhizome. The rhizome as a.
I don't know what rhizome is.
It's a plant system, a tubular system that grows. It grows horizontally rather than vertically. And instead of the tree of life image of the tree of life, and you have this hierarchy and so on, and its bottom grows up to the top, and you're sort of always reaching for the top. The rhizome is a continuous flow, and you can start in the middle. It's not beginning, middle, end. You can, and Deleuze and Guattari, the French critical theorists, Deleuze and Guattari invoke the rhizome as an image for many things, many kinds of systems.
I will look
and it's very useful. Yeah, it's a very useful sense of non-hierarchical systems, communities, and also this idea of in media res. You can enter at any point. So even as a novice, you can enter at any point. And they say of Dharma, it's good in the beginning, it's good in the middle, it's good at the end. So that's very helpful. And so Anne, we have this very last question that usually we make because Aurélie wants these questions. And we make this question to each person we have the opportunity to talk with.
And so this question is, what is art for you? What does it mean?
For me, it's a way of life, it's a path, it's a vow, it's a practice, it's spiritual, it's replenishing, it's also scary, and you have to suffer. And it's, I think I keep invoking this antithesis reality that we have to hold on to some of these practices as they become endangered. And I've had dreams where there was one when Kensei Rinpoche was visiting Naropa, and he was doing some abhishekas, but I think we were asked to dream. Maybe there was a ceremony where you remember your dream, but this idea of having, that the world was very threatened, and incredible war that was all over the surface, not just in places now, as we see. Yes. And so you had to take shelter underground, you had to go into hiding, you had to go into refuge, you needed to take your special, your teachings, your wisdom books, your consciousness of time, your artifacts, your archive in a way. I mean, because as we continued in this, whatever this, existence is, supposedly we're losing our memory.
Yes.
We're losing some of our abilities to just have instinct, to have it all in us. And so we need reminders, we need to have things that wake us up. And so that feels very real, that because the language has been so debased, and it becomes dominant through the social media and et cetera, and television pundits, the same kind of language, very dumbed down, very superficial, also aggressive, stupid, the worst. No intelligent thinking, and the poetry is bad. So how do you need to remember what it used to be like or invoke it? I mean, there are many places, great institutions of learning and scholarly work, and people are, I think, in their little archives and their scriptoriums doing the important work that people have been doing all the time. The monks in there and nuns to keep the value, doing the spinning the wheels and all that. But it's not, and maybe it needs to be hidden. It needs to be hidden so it won't be destroyed. But then you have this huge, in terms of the capitalocene, which is the big problem.
Or the hide inside of ourselves.
Yeah, and you mean the capitalocene?
No, what I mean us as human beings, the fact that we actually work on ourselves with art, that it becomes also a treasure inside of ourselves. Yes, of course. Can go on.
They can go on. You have to you have to have strength in that, and then you can, at the right time, it can be revealed, or you have people you can, but often you can pass on the teaching and it gets corrupted,
of course, yes.
And we see that also. So it's I don't have any answers, but I do think it's a time to really reflect and also hold your mind, not to get lost in inebriance, where you become, and as you get older, your memory is an issue. I find that's true of myself. I need to, remember better, and also to what your values are. What is your ethos? Are you really putting others before yourself? Are you really trying to help create, helping younger people find a way? And my advice is, don't lose your mind. I mean, work on things, practices but also don't get so self-involved that you're so traumatized that you have to spend your whole life in therapy figuring out how you can get through it. You have to get, you have to, it's Vajrayana, you have to cut to the chase and cut your, it's hard.
As you said, push also.
Push. Yeah. But how to wake up on the spot. And then when everything around you feels threatening, and then you're also just a commodity. You're known, you're surveilled. They know what you like, what colors you like, where you go, what you do. You become just a dot in this huge thing. And then robotics is going to change everything. With the opening of Amazon Go, the first store with no humans running it, opened in New York. It's going to be all over. No. Opened in New York last week.
Oh my God.
So that's going to change the economy. Many people will not have work. A lot of these service jobs will be gone. There's going to be more, I think, more immigrant. We're all going to be immigrants in 100 years, maybe by the end of this century, just because whole areas of the planet will be underwater and endless war, maybe some nuclear problems, and how to, be prepared for psychologically. And maybe there's no preparation you can make physically because you don't know. I mean, I've been in situations with, a bomb on my street or a flood at the gates, or during Sandy in New York. During, of course, we saw Katrina, and
yes, the preparation is really spiritual.
And so how to work, and these children, confronting gun terror in schools. Just in the last 2 weeks, it was a student who jumped the shooter and was killed and saved lives. It wasn't the police, it wasn't the other teachers, it wasn't. So that's kind of amazing. That's a different, and I mean, it was radical with 9/11, and even before that, terrorist attacks where you were willing to give up your life and detonate a whole, community, and that. So this things have changed a little. Rather than self-preservation, there's a kind of martyr mentality that has taken over in some ways.
Yes, I understand.
Where you become, and even these kids who want to kill in their own schools. I mean, this last incident was people in this classroom, friends, your students.
Yes. No, it's like crazy.
And it's like a disease of, and so Dharma it needs nourishment. It needs to have wise, teachers. It needs to have integrated more, and I think, and some of that goes on in prisons. Prisons are scary.
So like the art is like a way to...
Skillful means.
Skillful mean by art is a way to keep on the memory.
Yeah, exactly.
I think so. I believe too.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the work you're doing.
What can we say? Can we do? You speak about your book, please.
Oh.
I got completely hypnotized. Okay. I got hypnotized.
No, that's fine. No, I'm so happy to be here at the Maelstrom Festival in Bruxelles and with my new book, Harmonie, Jaguar.
Can you please show it to the camera?
Show it to the camera. This is Etel Adnan, a very wonderful artist now in her 90s. And it's a beautiful bilingual edition. And it's a poem handwriting that came out of a all-night ayahuasca ritual. And so, some kind of, I felt there was you become you travel in these ways. It's not about holding on to your own ego, your own, and so it's, it's a little questionable. I have a book out of this experience with my name on it, and so on. I see it as skillful means. I'm attached to this beautiful object to some extent, but not ultimately attached, and it became a community. So there's a CD with my family band, my son, my nephew, my friend Ha-Young Kim, who's a
So this is
cellist.
For tomorrow night, what we're going to...
We're going to read from this.
So it's French and English?
French and English. Very good translator, Vincent Brocquois, who did my last book in French with Jacques Syria, Archives pour un monde menacé. Menacing world, and it was a selection, and it brings me back to out of my world at home, coming here and in this unusual community, which I think of around David Giannoni and the things that you all do as a spiritual community, a family kind of community. I've come back for years, and there are always some people here, still here, the same people. It's not like an institution, we have this poet, and then we'll invite this person and this musician. They don't know each other. So you really feel the love, attention, the sense of connectivity and generosity in this community. It's very palpable. So I always love to come here, and that I can perform with friends and see other people I've known, Pierre Guéry and Marco Parente. It's been over probably a decade. Okay. These kinds of connections. So yes, very happy with Jaguar. It has, parts that are very oral and let's see a word. What tries to tell us of mammal stealth, active filaments, unprecedented warnings with consonants of H and W and hissing sounds and groans, hey, 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 hey. And I'll say it again, the suffering on this land, palpable right under you. What done to the indigenous ones, rip and torture of their person, emasculation, and to the land, and to the science, and to the medicine, and to the children, to the whole genocide. What summoning to tell you this? Hey, 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 brain a storehouse of gigantic suffering. Go 9 years into darkness. So it has this kind of ritual moving through the night and the different hours. And it becomes, I don't know, I wasn't, when I started to write it from these notes, I didn't know, it seemed too fractured. And then at some point, a little later, I thought, I'll just put it together, see what it looks like, and kind of came to be something, somewhat of a montage, different images, voices, sounds. Woo!
Yes, yes.
You know, this kind of playfulness and the sense of the presence of the shaman and the other participants. And it was, you know, sociologically a great, some part of me wanted to be an anthropologist, or an archaeologist of mourning is the term Charles Olson uses. So you're just, every morning you're hunting and looking, and you're like an animal with your proprioception and curious. So,
Okay.
yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. Thank you. Noémie.
Oh.